Already went.
Well, we want to open it up now. The first part of this panel, as I said, is dealing with the creative content. And there are no better people in the world to deal with this than Brian and Matt. They've recorded amongst them over 100 recordings, a large amount of which have been nominated for Grammys or won Grammys. And one of the things that we often found is that in dealing with digital content, a lot of people who come to these conferences don't understand what's there. They don't know how to find the content. They don't know what type of content they're capable of reinvigorating and revitalizing as sales tools in the digital marketplace. And what we're going to ask them to do is just sort of walk us through some of their projects that they've done. We'll open it up with Matt. And, you know, why don't you tell us about one or two projects that you've done and the recording process for that and how things were created?
I mean, there are basically two different types of projects to kind of talk about this issue. One is existing cataloging, exploitation of existing content, and then the creation of new content. None of this really makes a whole lot of sense without talking about rights. And obviously, if we assume that the rights to this content exist, that you're the company that owns the masters and possibly has the rights to the images and the film and the photos and whatever. I've worked on several catalog projects of Count Basie, Duke Ellington, David Sanborn, any number of things that were about when I worked at Blue Note or Warner Brothers or worked for Mosaic Records, where we were going to exploit content that already exists. And that's that's a research process where you go back and you say, okay, where are the masters? You get lists of the master recordings. You find out what are the tracks that existed on the album. Are there alternate takes of some of those songs that are worth hearing and that are worth the fans or the people who are into this music hearing? Are there songs that didn't make the album that are worth releasing? Is there other content that was recorded in the studio, possibly banter or discussion or interview material and stuff like that? And then ancillary content that could be photographs, posters, video also, any number of things. As you know, when you go back to part of that research process, which is, for example, I did a project, Count Basie after Frank live at the Sands, which is a case where Frank Sinatra did a recording live at the Sands in Las Vegas. Every night before Sinatra came out, Basie played a short set of music. So I went back and found the 3-track tapes, listened to all mixdowns of all these tracks, and picked out and found that there was really a full recording of live Count Basie that had never been heard, that we were able to release as a Count Basie record. So you go back in, you mix it down, you turn it into an actual record. And in a lot of the earlier material, you'd think there might be more content there, but there really isn't. And the biggest trick right now with the record industry is that the people who own this content, getting back to the ownership issue, there aren't man hours and there's not staff there to do the research and find these issues. So you could imagine that perhaps with some major act from the past that, there must be sheets from the studio, and there must be notes, and must be interviews and posters and all that. Well, they might exist, but they're most likely in some warehouse somewhere that's impossible to find, that there's no one to label to even figure out where it might be and go find it. So for catalog projects, the possibility of finding that kind of content is less likely. Currently, though, when I work with artists, this model, the approach to recording has changed drastically. To the point where, for example, I've worked with a lot of artists recently, a lot of vocal artists, and there are cases like Sophie Millman and also someone like Kirk Whalum, the saxophonist, where they're still on real major labels, and the labels are instituting plans to market the artist. So there will be EPK material, there'll be additional photo shoots, there'll be things of that sort. So there is a lot of content there to monetize. However, the model that's taking over for a lot of artists is more of a fan-funded model where the entire recording process is documented in many, many ways. I produced Nicole Henry's recent Embraceable project, and we did it through a company called Artist Share, where people signed up in the beginning as participants, similar to the Kickstarter model, where you buy in early, you get an experience every few days. She'll put up a blog, she'll give a journal of what's happening, we'll post sheet music, we'll post recordings of rehearsals, let people, stream the video from the recording session. So a lot of additional content gets created that then those fans are all able to be a part of that project, and you're able to dissolve the price point where instead of just selling an album, you're selling this entire experience that involves a multiple number of formats, whether it's video, audio, print, photographs, anything of that sort. So now these days a lot more content is being created. How to monetize that content is for everyone else to talk about, but that's basically the process. I think the biggest trick on a creative level is how can you still create this additional content? How can you do it in a way that doesn't cause a distraction from or hinder the creative process? Very frequently, for example, a project I did recently, there was a film crew there to film the entire process. Well, we're in the studio working with artists who, need to be creative and have their, document something of the moment. And to have a camera in their face while they're doing it, or have someone say, hey, do you need makeup because we're going to do an interview afterwards, isn't really the most productive environment. So I think balancing how much of it you can document and how much content you can create, with actually still most importantly documenting that creative process is what's important. So,
okay. Brian, why don't you tell us a little bit about your recording experiences and how you develop content?
Well, there are different ways, I guess, and because the business has changed, there's been projects that I've worked on sort of where we're fundraising, and we're actually, before we actually ever even finishing recording, we're creating content so that we can actually raise funds. So doing sort of pitch videos, doing kind of fun videos that we send out on a regular basis and that kind of thing. And then there are projects like the Greg Reporter, I just finished this release last week, where we really just went in and just recorded just the audio. There was no actual secondary content until after the record was done. But I think, more and more, obviously, we're thinking more about, how much metadata you're going to add to a particular digital download or a release, but also in terms of just social networking, how are you going to promote this thing? What other tools do you have, like videos and such? So,
when you get into recording new content, do you sort of try to conceptualize what you'll do extra, what can be done? Or is it just an approach, whatever we do at the time we do?
Well, for me, I first start with the music, in the sense of if it's a project where I'm being hired to produce a particular project. So the first thing is about going through all the songs, and also looking at, in terms of when we narrow down what are the songs that we're actually going to go out and record, what is the narrative and what's the story for this album. Even if I'm doing like a 7-track like EP for somebody, where it's not a full 12 song long playing, that we look at it and really just figure out what's the narrative, and if there's other things that we can think about in terms of videos, also visually what we're trying to portray, thinking about from the artwork and ancillary artwork, what that story and what the narrative is going to be for that project.
Now, you've had a deep history with dealing with acoustic-based music.
Say it again?
You had a deep history with dealing with acoustic-based music, jazz, and instrumental music. What was the process like for creating content in A&R and something like Norah Jones' album? Because you didn't really know Norah Jones was kind of a fluke that blew up, and then she sold like 9-10 million records, got 8 Grammys. How did you approach working with an artist like that and developing content?
Well, when we started Nora's record, we actually started out doing demos. And she had just started actually songwriting, but she was actually singing with another songwriter, Jesse Harris, and being the main vocalist for that. And that kind of inspired her to really start writing her own material. So when we were getting ready to do the demo, she had stuff that she wanted to do. She had some covers. There was some of Jesse's material, and then she had, I think, about 3 songs at that time. And we went in just for 2 days with kind of no pressure. This wasn't going to be the record. And an old studio source of sound, and we just tracked, and we ended up doing, I think, 13 songs in 2 days. And it was just basically, piano, bass, drums, guitar, and her singing. And out of that, the idea was, well, we didn't realize what we were going to have, but when we came out with that, we had this great demo, and we ended up paring that down, giving her a 6-track EP that she could sell while she did gigs, and so she could have some income coming in while she was on the road. before we actually went into the studio. But in the end, what happened is those 6 tracks ended up becoming part of the final record because they were that good, I think. So, that was, yeah.
Did you, now, there was subsequently videos that came about. How did that come into play?
Well, Nora was funny because Nora really did not like music videos. So it was like really pulling teeth. She agreed to do, one which she kind of hated, and we didn't think was great, but when the record took off, MTV had originally said no, jumped on it, and then all of a sudden, all these different video channels jumped on it. And then getting her to do a second video was really like pulling teeth. And then I wasn't there for the second records, but I know from people I've talked to is she would agree to do one video for the album. So for them, it really gave them not a whole lot to work on, but at the same time she would go out and do a extensive tour. But she had a personal feeling about videos because the idea of lip syncing to music and I think someone had to be creative enough to come up with a video concept that really told a story that she felt like was fun. But otherwise, it was not something she wanted to go out and do.
Well, that brings up an interesting segue into the next part.